let's just talk about the drums and what I'm doing for starts here. So on the drums, I have a kick in, kick out, a snare top, snare bottom, and for those mics, I'm using a Beta 91, a DPA 4055, and then for snare top, I'm using a 57, snare bottom, I'm using a KSM 137, hat, I'm using a Rode M5, rack, I'm using a Sennheiser 604, floor, I'm using a Audix D6, and for overheads, I'm doing a space pair of KSM 137s. There's also something that I've been trying recently is using what I call a geek mic. Now there's a not so nice name for this mic, but I'm calling it geek mic. Usually what it is a microphone that's over the kick drum, kind of pointed right towards the drummer's knees. Sometimes people call it knee mic as well. That's kind of, here's what that sounds like. So I think of the geek mic as like just a overall drum picture. I really like to take that and just kind of grid it up like that. I had that off right now, but usually I grid it and then I just smash the heck out of it, even more so than this sometimes. Like, you know? And what's cool is like when you solo the drums out, is you blend it in. Just kind of adds a little more mid-range to it. I could go without it, honestly, but it's something we're trying. Also for the ears, it's been really nice to just add some context to things. As far as how those different inputs sound, I'm just gonna go to my kick here. So we've got kick in. So all I'm doing here is just some gating, a little bit of compression, and then on the wave side, it looks like I'm just going into an SSL and a vintage exciter, which I can live with or without, honestly. And then for the out, which is the 4055, same thing, just high pass filter. No EQ on the console at the moment. And for the out, it looks like I'm doing SSL, R bass, a lot of the low end and girth kind of comes from this. So let me just show you what it sounds like without. So all that low end is from that. I can't do a show without R bass, honestly. That's the majority of why I use waves. And then I've been trying to go into a little bit of saturation just to kind of add some mid-range. So all together without the waves on the kick. So pretty crucial there. Now there are things I could do on the console to get close to that, but personally I know how these tools work, and so I'm consistently going to them and grabbing them. For snare, so again 57, and I usually go about 2 fingers over the rim, pointed towards the middle. You'll notice that the clip light is coming on. It doesn't mean it's clipping, it's just this console clips like at a very low, I think it's like -3. And if you look at the waveform, it is not chopped off. But yeah, high pass filter, 86, pretty low. I think a lot of body kind of comes below 120, 100, 105. Some people, they go real high with it, and I feel like you lose some of the fullness of it, right? So nothing on the gate here. I do turn this on and off sometimes. Especially with that hi-hat bleed. It's pretty gnarly sometimes. Kind of hear it in the context even. And then on the wave side, I'm doing pretty small, right? These days I'm just doing a little bit of expansion with the F6. So instead of just constantly pushing the EQ, it's like doing it whenever it goes below or above a certain threshold. And then I've been using this exciter to get some more top end out of it. Pretty dramatic on the exciter. I mean, that's like the whole reason it's at the front of the mix is because of that. For bottom, Again, it's a 137. I usually go right in the middle of it, pointed right towards the snares, maybe three or four fingers away, maybe. That sounds right. So I'm using console gate on that, just to get rid of some of that kick punch. I find that the more sources that you have with other instruments or other parts of the drum, the more time smear you get. So if I had the gate off, you would kind of start losing some of the definition of the kick because of how much it's picking up. Now, honestly, what I should probably do is play with the mic position and get the kick more in the null, but I'll do that on another show and re-record it and do this again. EQ. So one thing that I really like doing is linking my snare top and bottom EQs. Now, Michael, why would you do that? Well, everybody knows about the phase boogeyman and how like certain mics and the way that they interact together, you can actually have like cancellation because say the positive and negative wires are reversed backwards, or like, or for instance, when you're above the snare, when you hit it, it's actually pulling the wave down. It's pulling the air down at first. And when you're below it, it's pushing. So the interaction between the two is negative when you put those two waveforms together. So, obviously sometimes you have to like flip the phase for them to be in phase, in relative phase. Well, I see people doing that, but I see a lot of people, they'll like use a high pass filter on the snare bottom and not the top or something weird like that. And what people don't realize is that the way that EQ works is by changing the phase. So what might be in phase at one point could now be out of phase if, say, for instance, you take your high pass filter and put it in a different spot on your bottom as compared to your top. So for instance, if I took these two snares here, let's turn on additive mode here. So definitely in phase right now. So if I went over here and I unlinked the snare high pass filters, if I could find it, and I took the bottom and I just shifted this to here, now they sound kind of thin, but now when I unflip the phase, it has body again. So I'll just let you listen to that for a second. Now, honestly, maybe not the best example, but definitely play with it sometimes. If you start putting your high pass filters at different spots, you can have like these negative interactions between the two. I do that between any two instruments that that are putting out the same thing. So like if I have two different guitar mics on one amp, or if I have even two amps sometimes, I will link the EQ and treat them as one. Now, that's not always a bad thing. Like sometimes you want the width, like say for instance, I'm panning a guitar mic hard left and hard right. If I treat the left side differently than the right, I will create more width from it because I am changing how the two interact together in the center. Matt Huber has some stuff about that on his Instagram that I've taken up for my live stuff. Okay, so we've gone over snare, we've gone over kick, hat, nothing special. It's kind of over it, pointed towards the, if you're looking at the kit, it's kind of towards him, and it's that way it can hit the, that way the mic can pick up the, tambourine as well. So just cutting the lows out, smashing a little bit so that when he gets into it, it kind of doesn't take off. I feel like a lot of people ask me about my toms, so let me just show you what's going on there. So I'm just gonna solo out a section here. So my rack tom, I'll start this by saying if your toms don't sound good, there's nothing, it will never sound good. But, and Will is an amazing drummer, an amazing drum tuner, and he also is the owner of the brand of drums that he's playing. So he plays a Franklin kit. He's one of the owners of Franklin drums. So a very good relationship. He knows how to work those drums to make them sound good. But listening to this rack tom here, let me hone in on it a little more. Yeah, that's tight. So for EQ, some pretty drastic EQ moves. Just adding a lot of top, taking out some mud, pushing the fundamental. My filter is just right below where the fundamental is. And notice I'm using a very, not blocking the system. I'm using a very hard slope. I don't want anything below that slope frequency there, or the high pass frequency. I'm using that 16 VU on as my compression, and then for waves, I'm probably using an SSL strip or Omni channel. Nope, just a little bit of saturation from the NLS. So very subtle. I'll be totally real with you. I would not be able to tell you if that's off or on. So same with floor. I'm sure floor looks very similar to that. So let me just find a little section with that. So again, this is an Audix D6. Oh, both of these I'm saturating at the preamp stage here. So I've got this little dual stage valve. You can kind of hear it breaking up just a little bit in that upper mid. I find it kind of works as like compression a little bit, just kind of keeps everything in check. Also makes it sound a little fuller. Same thing, really hard slope right at 42 Hertz, gating from the console, key filtering to the fundamental over here on that left side. You can see I do that on a rack as well. And then for compression, I'm also using that 16 VU. Let's just see what that sounds like without that. Now it's obviously louder. Maybe if I gain match a little more. Just kind of makes it gushy and nice and even, and I like that sound. Same thing over here, I'm doing more saturation. I think a lot of great mixers, studio mixers specifically, will tell you that a little more power. You can kind of notice that one a little more. Anyways, great mixes, loud mixes come from lots of saturation and lots of careful stitches of saturation. So you'll notice that I have like little bits of like tube distortion and channel distortion everywhere. And then for overheads. Now, if you've seen me talk about overheads before, you'll know that I think that they're extremely important. Let me go over here. And that's because I think of them as kit mics, right? They're not really cymbal mics. You can hear the cymbals, you can hear the hat, but it's really a picture of the whole kit and what it sounds like if you're listening to it from maybe where Will's sitting at. So I tend to start my drum sounds with the overheads, actually. I tend to put a lot more low end in than most people would. So you'll notice I'm at 147 with my high pass filter. And I just want to show you even as I pull that out, there's like a little bit more low end there that I could have. So don't be afraid to put that in there. Before we go into the processing, let me just show you that one thing I really pay attention to is the interaction between the overheads and the snare, because you can lose quite a bit of body if you're not careful. So let me just make this post fader for a second. So we've got our overheads blended in with our snare. So with no face flip. Notice how it puts the snare up the middle a little more. Lose like all the body. Pretty crazy, right? So everyone always knows to check the phase between the top and the bottom. Check the phase between your top and your overheads. I cannot stress that enough. And also, if you adjust your high pass filter, recheck it, because again, when you add a high pass filter, you're essentially adding 180 degrees phase shift at whatever frequency it's set to, which is not a bad thing. You just need to know it's doing that. So as a whole kit right here, a lot of that snare, that hat bleed is just from the snare, so I'm gonna turn this gate back on. Pretty crazy how much bleed there is. For the whole kit, what I am doing is, okay. So remember what I said about just bits and pieces of saturation. I'm going into J37 here for some grit. And you can see that I'm literally just pulled in a preset. Like I do that all the time. I just start with a preset and I tweak instead of just do my own thing. It's interesting to see what other people are doing. Into a Pultec here for my bottom end and top. At one point I was trying an F6 doing some more expansion. Let's see what it sounds like. Maybe I should put it back. Just a little too hi-fi maybe. Maybe it's because I replaced it with this Vitamin here. So this is what Vitamin sounds like. a little more like even with the tonality of it, I would say. But yeah, as a whole, without any of the wave stuff, it honestly sounds great. It's just you're missing some of the bottom end and like the girth of it, especially from the snare. Geez. Here's what it's like without the saturation. So I would say that the saturation there is like a good chunk of why the drums sound good, honestly. And what's nice about that is like, for instance, if I like some of the songs, I like push into it a little more. So if I were to just do that here, let me just save where I'm at just so I don't boof this up. Sounds wild, right? But it's a cool sound. Like you could, in the context of the mix, it's really not that bad. So yeah, so sometimes I lean into that if I want more of that sound. So you're seeing on here probably this KS. So that is short for kick snare parallel compression. If you have not heard about this trick yet, you should maybe try doing it if you're mixing a similar genre to me. Typically what you do is you take like your kick and snare, sometimes toms, and you put them in a bus and you just kind of smush them and make them sound thick or whatever. There's different ways of thinking about it, but the way that I like to think about it is my drum bus is my RMS bus. It is a gradual, there's a gradual amount of compression. It's catching a lot of the peaks, and there's not a lot of transient from it. So if you listen to my drum bus, there's quite a bit of transient, but you know, it's a little smoother than say my parallel one. Let me, so for that guy, I'm just using a G bus and just kind of making it as punchy as possible so that I can kind of like, when the drums at a low volume, I can blend that in. And just have that transient just on top of the mix, however I want. For verbs and stuff like that, I've got two things. I almost do the same thing for every show. Maybe if I'm doing broadcasts, I'll add a third, but I always do a drum short and drum long, or a drum room and a drum vibe, okay? The drum short is usually an emulation of a room, or it's like putting the kit in a space. I found that one of the biggest differences between studio drums and real drums is that there's no room mics. So my drum short verb kind of helps put those drums somewhere so where they're not like right in your face, right in your ears, right? So just listening to the kit here. So with no verb, you can kind of hear what I'm talking about, right? So I'm gonna open up the drum room. Sounds like a pair of room mics, kind of, you know? And sometimes what I'll do is I'll even compress them really hard, make them sound more like room mics, but I didn't like what that was doing apparently, so I turned it off. As far as what verb I'm actually using, true verb. So I went to the true verb, Studio A. So just a room emulation, super easy. Lately I've been doing the IR live, and I've been using IR presets and stuff like that. So that way it's quite literally just a recording of what a room sounds like as a reverb. For long, so this is where my like vibe is coming from. So my like, you know, very digital sounding verbs, or if I'm trying to like make an effect or something like that, I'll typically do that with drum long. For instance, I don't know if they play it, but there's like one song, it's a song from their first record, and there's just some insane tom hits on it. And so the drum long would typically be, would go from this to like more super thick, like lush verb for that song. So usually my drum room verb kind of stays the same from song to song, I just change how much I'm using. And then this changes drastically from song to song. I mean, I can just show you, for instance, on You and I, I'll just have them play the same kit here. It's a gate verb versus learning it's that long verb type thing. Looking for Some Light was the song I was thinking of. So Looking for Some Light, just super long verb kind of thing. Anyways, let's go back to learning. So yeah, as a whole, that's how I'm getting the drum sounds that I'm getting. One thing that I do that I think is important to the sound is I actually take the drum room sounds, the drum room verb, and I go back into the bus with it. So that way the room mics are being kind of, or the room emulation is kind of being processed with the kit as a whole. I find that it sounds like a little more cohesive. I go back and forth on that. There's some show files I have with different artists where I don't do that, especially if I need that verbs to like really be heard and at the front of the mix. Sometimes I'll put the drum long straight to my left-right bus, and I'll put like the room directly into the drum bus, whatever. There's no immediate way. There's not a definite way to do it. Okay, cool. So that's drums.